I started my life in London living out of a storage closet. Now, before you wonder whose parents put their child's bedroom in a storage closet, I have to admit to all of you that I have a 5-month-old son who's currently residing in the hallway of a very small one-bedroom. So my parents actually had me in the lap of luxury. When we moved back to the States, I got a serious upgrade into a bedroom. About the size of most of your bathrooms, I'd guess. But still, it was an upgrade. So you can only imagine that when I went to university and saw my dorm room, I thought I'd conquered the world. I was probably the only freshman on campus who actually thought my dorm was massive. But in all seriousness, that dorm room and that college campus was a game changer for me. At Yale, we organized our dorms into residential colleges. Each held about 400 students and was organized around a central courtyard. Anytime you were standing in a dorm, you had a window looking into that courtyard, and you had a window looking out onto the street, an eye inward and an eye outward, so to speak. So without asking anything of our inhabitants, other than to basically inhabit, the architecture provided us with a sense of belonging, of security, of peace, a connection back to our family or to the other students, as well as a sense of expansiveness, a connection back to the town around us, to the exterior environment. And this, in a nutshell, is architecture. It's a way in which to frame our interaction with our surrounding environment. So I want you guys to all humor me for a second and close your eyes. And just think of the last time you felt safe. It could have been your childhood treehouse in your backyard, your kitchen, maybe your childhood bedroom with posters on the wall. It's also possible all of you guys are sitting here right now imagining your offices, given how much we work these days. But wherever that is, just sit there and picture the room around you, the light coming in. Think about the emotions you feel. Okay, you can open your eyes. What you just did is the initial part of architecture. Architecture is how we frame our interactions with the world. It's a way in which to both protect us from our environment as well as to connect us to our environment. Basically, what you guys were just doing is the start of architecting a home. And it turns out we've been architecting homes for centuries. This is Jericho, which is one of the first recorded towns. And basically, it occurred when we made a switch from a hunting and gathering society into an agricultural one. Suddenly, we had the need for permanence. Up until now, we'd only ever had temporary structures. But we realized that we actually needed to stay put, to build a society around agriculture. And so we made the strongest houses we could. We took from nature and built up the earth. Turns out we made them strong enough that 10,000 years later, we can still see them. But the architecture was grounded in what humans needed. It's something called human-centered design, where we think of the individual and build out from there. When I was living in New York, I specialized in workplace design. And I had a client once who needed a refresher on his meeting rooms. So we started brainstorming what he could do. We thought about cutting a hole in the floor and sinking a meeting room down so that he could see the workers below when he was in a meeting. Or putting that out on the balcony and enclosing it in glass so you could feel like you were outside even when you were working. He loved the ideas and we started moving forward, but about a third of the way through the project, he turned to me in a meeting and said, "So where are we having our all-hands meeting?" Well, it was a company of 500 people, and I can guarantee 500 people did not fit in a hole in the floor. So we started over, and we looked at the only place where 500 people did fit, which was at the center of that floor plate. And we started building outwards. We basically created a way in which to center the design around the humans, a way in which to build outwards. We created an interior courtyard, not that dissimilar from the way in which I felt on my university campus. Again, it was human-centered design, but it was also a happy accident. And it turns out that most of our happy accidents can actually create some great design. For example, Çatalhöyük is a Neolithic town which realized that it needed to be a defensible city. So it pushed all of its architecture together and got rid of the streets. And in doing so, it actually needed to make the entrances through the roof and to cut holes in the perimeter of the roof in order to allow light air in. Think of it as modern-day kitchen hoods, letting the air out. But in doing so, they also let light in. And they realized that windows aren't half bad. It's actually kind of nice to be inside of a building and to have a connection to the exterior, to have that light. Again, happy accidents. We now have zoning regulations that make sure that this occurs. We cap building heights to make sure that we get light down to the street level. We create building setbacks to make sure that we get light into lower levels. So happy accidents can create some amazing design. But all of those are still grounded in human needs, in human innovation. So we all know here that I'm here to talk about Mars, so let's get to it. I have a question for all of you, and I want you to actually raise your hand. If I said that I had a sign-up sheet up here, and we were doing a mission to Mars tomorrow, and we were taking civilians, how many of you would actually sign up to go? All right, so more than I was expecting. We have an adventurous crowd, but I would still say significantly less than half. So for all of you guys who did not raise your hand, what about it seems so scary about going to Mars? And again, raise your hand. Is it that it feels really bleak, that it's an unknown, that it feels incredibly futuristic and maybe not all that irrelevant to us today? So I think space is kind of difficult to grasp a hold of. It's a foreign concept to us. But I'd say it's actually a lot more relevant than a lot of people realize. We're doing longer and longer term space missions. And as we do so, we're realizing that we actually need to consider the human. In 2015, we actually put 2 astronauts up on the space station for 340 days. And the primary objective was to figure out deep space exploration, to eventually put boots on Mars. So if we're going to put boots on Mars, we have to figure out a way to get there, which means designing the shuttle. When I was in grad school, I started actually studying what it would mean to go to Mars. I started thinking about the space shuttle, and if we were putting that many people up there, how do we protect those people? If you think about the International Space Station or any shuttles we've sent up thus far, anytime a meteorite would hit or space junk would hit, the shuttle basically dies. So what happens to the people within? Well, there's a way to protect people. Organisms have been doing this for centuries. They've been protecting themselves from the environment. How do they do that? Well, think of a sea anemone. When it's in danger, it closes up in on itself. But when the environment's actually beneficial, it opens up, for example, to take in food. We could do something similar with the architecture. We could have it close up in on itself when there's space debris, meteorites, space junk, but open back up to allow sunlight in, to take advantage of that power for solar panels. Or what if we think about organisms as our actual home? There's something called the bow tie network, which is one of the most robust systems. And the basic premise is that we need to protect the core at all costs. As we move increasingly outwards, the extra functions are less critical, and we make them more redundant so that they protect that core. Think of it as if you cut off my finger, it's okay, terrible, but I live. But if you attack my heart, I don't. It's very similar to that. The architecture are the bones, the skeleton, the people, the command center, that's the core, that's the heart. What would this look like if we were to architecturalize the system? Something like this, where we have the ability to flex and to expand and contract. But we also have the ability to center the command control system at the core, where we put the people at the core, and at the perimeter, we can put less critical functions, like storage. And as you start to build something like this, you can also start to imagine putting the people in those towers. And if you put people in those towers, you're probably going to want to put some of the other things we've talked about, like windows, things that are good for human physiology and psychology. When I was in grad school, I was also working at NASA for a bit, and I had lunch with an astronaut one day and asked him what it felt like to be in space. If I was going to be designing for space, I wanted to know what it was like up there. And he said something that stuck with me, which is anytime he looked out into the universe, out into the vast expanse, it was incredibly unsettling to feel that dark, to feel like a speck of dust. But if he just did a 180 and looked at Earth, he suddenly felt grounded and tethered. It was a connection home. But as we move deeper into space, we lose that connection to Earth. When we're on Mars, we won't be able to see Earth anymore. We won't really even be able to connect with Earth in lifetime. So the architecture has to do that for us. It's not enough to just create the technical capabilities. We have to actually think about what it would feel like to be in that space. Think of a New York apartment. For example, if you're looking out my living room window, I can see directly into the living room window next to me. It's a little too close for comfort, but there's still something comforting knowing that I know who my neighbors are, my community. The architecture can do something very similar, give you a window out into the galaxy and a window back into your community, very similar to the university campus. So what happens when we actually get to Mars? Well, we create Mars Ice House. This is a project that I created with my group Search Plus in collaboration with another architecture firm, Clouds.AO. And we said that if NASA considers ice the building block of life, it can basically sustain human and plant ecosystems. Well, why shouldn't it be the building block of architecture then? If they're saying that they're looking for planets with ice, why wouldn't we use it? Because then it doesn't have to be Mars Ice House, it can be any planet's ice house. So how do we actually build this thing? Well, first we send robots, because how amazing would it be to show up on Mars and have your home already there? And those robots start excavating ice. They dig that ice up, turn it into vapor, and then reprint it as liquid. And they basically inflate a balloon for us, pressurize that balloon, and as they start printing that ice, they print it around the perimeter of that inflated balloon, around that air chamber. And after they build one dome, they build a second dome because of redundancy. We want to protect the core, right? So what does that actually end up looking like? It's not that dissimilar from where you guys live now. It's basically a home with a front yard and a backyard. It's just that in the past, our front yard and our backyard in outer space has been deathly, right? You can't go outside without putting on a spacesuit and a helmet. But how often do you want to have to go into your front yard and get dressed to do it? So instead, we used ice, which is an incredible radiation barrier. At much smaller thicknesses than most materials, it can actually keep out the harmful sunlight and let the best sunlight in. So you can stand in your front yard or in your backyard and feel a connection to the Martian landscape. Gone are the opaque, thick, heavy habitats or building beneath the Martian regolith, which is basically Martian dirt. Suddenly we can embrace life on other planets. We can put it above ground. We're basically creating a lighthouse on the surface of Mars. And for the couple of you who said you were willing to go with me to Mars tomorrow, this habitat might fit you guys. But if I've managed to convince anyone else that living on Mars might actually be nice, we could start creating more of these. We could create an entire community. And you go back to what the astronaut said, which is you need a way to tether yourself, right? So suddenly we can tether ourselves to the Martian landscape. You can stand in here, and because ice is transparent, you can see outside. But if we have a whole bunch of these cropping up, if we create a community, then you can see those other homes. You're creating a neighborhood. So suddenly you have a window back to the landscape, to the world around you, but you also have a window to your community. So what am I really trying to say here? First, I would say Mars is not necessarily sci-fi. Going to space does not have to be sci-fi, but it does have to be grounded in the human. We can't design until we understand what humans need. And the other thing I'd like to say is that architecture is not a static building. It's a relationship. It's the way you interact with the world. So when you guys all closed your eyes and had an emotion about a space, you had memories about how you felt when you were inside that space. That's the start of architecture. It's just that it's the role of the architect to come up with a space that empowers those emotions, that makes you feel connected to the world around you and to the people in that space. Thank you.